Call the meeting to order. Mr. Temporary Secretary, could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Ackerson,
Present.
Mr. Allred, Ms. Billman, Mr. Fell,
Here.
Mr. Fitch,
Here.
Mr. Hopkins, Ms. Wadrago, Mr. Weiskopf,
Here.
and Ms. Yu.
We do not have a quorum. Therefore, by the rules of the Plan Commission, unless a fifth commissioner shows up prior to a case that we plan to vote on, which would possibly be the second case, we will not be able to reach a decision tonight. But we could go ahead and have discussion, if that would be helpful. Are there any changes to the agenda? We have the minutes from the April 4th, 2019 meeting of the Plan Commission, which we cannot approve. So let's continue that to the next Plan Commission meeting, which should be the 22nd, something like that? 19th. Math.
Not the 20th.
20th. Okay. Communications. Do we have any communications?
No.
Continued public hearings. We have plan case number 2359T18, application by the zoning administrator to amend the zoning ordinance with changes to Article 2, Article 5, Article 6, and other relevant sections to facilitate solar energy system installation. Mr. Ricci.
Thank you for coming in on this lovely, bright, summery spring day. Soon, the zoning administrator will be requesting an amendment to the zoning ordinance to add language to allow principal use solar renewable energy systems and to modify existing language that regulates accessory use solar arrays. Staff are seeking direction from the Plan Commission on the scope and detail of the amendments per review, and then will return to the Commission with draft language at a later date. Staff have had internal discussions with select community development staff and the Sustainability Advisory Commission, and now would like the Plan Commission's guidance on the general framework being developed. Two issues have arisen that call for considering a text amendment. First, the zoning ordinance currently contains no language to permit a large solar array that would be the principal use on a parcel. It would have been helpful to have these desired regulations in place for the recent principal use solar array at the city landfill, and having such regulations in place will streamline the process for future projects. This plan case was a recent request by the city of Urbana to allow a 41-acre solar array on the grounds of the closed landfill. Because solar renewable energy system is not a listed use in the table of uses in the zoning ordinance, staff had to treat it as an electrical substation, which does not fulfill the same function, nor is it as large as the typical solar array. Second, the zoning ordinance does not directly address small solar arrays. It specifically permits small arrays up to 6 feet in height in a residential district and allows them to encroach into required side and rear yards up to 18 inches from a property line, similar to the encroachment permitted to accessory structures that are no larger than 750 square feet in residential districts. That's really the only mention of solar in the zoning ordinance for permitting them as a use. Therefore, past interpretation of the zoning ordinance directed staff to treat small solar arrays as a mechanical system, similar to a condensing unit for a heating and cooling system, rather than as a true accessory structure. This creates issues, especially for solar arrays that are associated with non-residential uses. For example, Section 6D requires screening of ground-mounted mechanical equipment, such as solar arrays, for non-residential uses, and they must be screened from view from public rights-of-way and adjacent residential districts. Staff have received inquiries from potential installers who expressed concern about the additional cost of extensive screening and inquired why solar arrays were required to be screened from view, but a large accessory structure like a utility building were not required. Urbana is not alone in its lack of specificity on planning and zoning for solar arrays. This is a quote from the American Planning Association solar briefing papers. This proposed text amendment would make Urbana the only city in the area that is explicitly treating principal and accessory solar uses as by right uses. Champaign treats smaller solar arrays as an accessory structure and has no provision for larger solar arrays. There is no mention of them, though, in their zoning ordinance. This is a staff interpretation. Bloomington is drafting a wind and solar text amendment which would permit larger solar arrays in agricultural districts and some business and manufacturing districts, and smaller arrays in other districts, but they don't have one as of yet. The town of Normal does not specifically address solar arrays in their zoning ordinance, and larger solar arrays require an entirely separate public process. Savoy doesn't explicitly permit solar arrays. They would specially permit it as a similar wind energy system use. And in Champaign County, the county recently passed a principal use solar array text amendment which permits large arrays in the Ag 1 and Ag 2 districts with a special use permit. They allow smaller ground-mounted solar arrays with either a zoning permit, like an accessory structure. It allows roof arrays with no permit at all. In researching this topic, staff have participated in planning conference sessions, seminars, and are currently reviewing over 40 solar documents, including model zoning ordinances. Here's a snip from the Sol Smart presentation. And in 2015, Urbana participated as a beta community in the Grow Solar Partnership, which was a Department of Energy funded initiative to reduce local barriers to solar development, and worked with environmental sustainability manager Scott Tess, who is with us tonight. Their organization reviewed the city's administrative and regulatory framework for potential hurdles to the installation of small and large solar arrays, and listed the following comments, some of which are on this snip from their letter, which was 8 pages. Because solar land uses are not defined, they recommend defining principal and accessory solar uses. Accessory uses should explicitly clarify where accessory solar uses are allowed. The city should include principal solar energy system in the table of uses. The city should allow height exemptions for roof-mounted systems when necessary and provide flexible lot coverage development standards. This is the snip from the Sol Smart's zoning best practices for solar, one of the model solar zoning ordinances that we've been consulting. The main questions staff have considered and request guidance on to craft the text amendment are: how should we differentiate between principal use and accessory use solar arrays? How should we regulate principal use and accessory use solar arrays, and which zoning districts should these be permitted in? Staff settled on 2 options to differentiate between larger and smaller solar arrays: intended end user and array size. This is a principal use solar array. It's 229 acres in Queensland, and it puts the energy right on the grid. This is an accessory use solar array. Riggs Beer Company, little less than 3,900 square feet, 76 kilowatts versus the 230 megawatts from the previous picture you saw. This feeds their use of crafting delicious beer and serving it to people at their property. On a good day, if they take in more energy than they use, the excess goes out onto the grid. but it would still be an accessory use solar array. We're not getting into sizes of larger than X, our principal, average consumption versus average production. We're kind of suggesting looks like a duck, walks like a duck. We're going to call it a duck and say that this is a principal array and this is a accessory array. The second determinant is size, and size is relative. A 1 acre solar array on a 40-acre farm parcel is relatively small, but a 1 acre solar array on a 2 acre residential lot is overwhelmingly large. Staff believe that intended end user is the best way to differentiate between principal and accessory uses. And staff also recommends using the array size to determine whether the use should be permitted by right or with a conditional or special use permit. And the second question that we get to is regulating principal and accessory use solar arrays. Currently, the table of uses in the zoning ordinance already regulates 13 different land uses based on their floor area. So manufacturing houses, warehouses, retail space, where the use is permitted by right but requires a conditional or special use if it exceeds a certain size of floor area. A similar approach could be used to regulate principal use solar arrays. Staff proposes the following for these principal use solar arrays. Permitted by right if it is 1 acre or less in area. It requires a conditional use permit if it's medium-sized between 1 and 5 acres, and if it's more than 5 acres, it would be large and require a special use permit. So in the case of the medium size, it would go to the Zoning Board of Appeals to get that conditional use permit. And then if it were large, it would require a special use permit and have to come to the Plan Commission and then the City Council. And then we would also regulate that array as a principal structure similar to a house or to a building for some regulations, such as required yard setbacks, but we might treat it to a different standard for other development standards, such as height. In a zoning district that allows a 35-foot tall house, you might not want a 35-foot tall solar array, but that is where we are seeking your guidance. So as far as regulating accessory use solar arrays, current planning and zoning practices such as put out by the American Planning Association and SolSmart in the Department of Energy recommending treating small solar arrays as an accessory structure rather than as a mechanical system. Staff believe that it would be reasonable and equitable to regulate smaller accessory use solar arrays as the same way that we regulate accessory structures. For example, accessory solar arrays 750 square feet or smaller in an R1 to R7 zoning district could encroach into a required side or rear yard up to 18 inches from a property line, just like a shed or another accessory structure could. Accessory solar arrays on a lot with single or two family dwelling would be included in the maximum combined area of accessory structures. Now, these two regulations would only apply to ground-mounted solar arrays, as roof-mounted solar arrays would automatically meet applicable zoning regulations except for total structure height. Accessory solar arrays could be limited to 15-foot tall in R1 through R4 zoning districts as recommended by many model ordinances. And then they could be allowed up to 15 feet or to half the height of the principal building in R5 through R7 zoning districts. And then staff recommend that accessory solar arrays be excluded from gross floor area calculations, and then in turn from floor to area ratio calculations. as your footnote tells you, sheds and garages for single and two-family dwellings, as well as mechanical systems, are all already excluded from floor area calculations. If a proposed accessory solar array did not meet a particular applicable zoning regulations, it would require a variance, just like any accessory structure, to which it would go to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a minor variance, or to the Zoning Board of Appeals and then to the City Council for a major variance. For example, if a proposed array area would bring the aggregate area of all accessory structures above the maximum allowable for that district, it would require a variance. So our first question for you. Should principal use solar arrays be regulated based on their size, with smaller arrays being permitted by right, and with larger arrays being permitted with conditional or special use permits? Or do you think there might be a better way to regulate principal use solar arrays?
I think we'll take that up in discussion.
Okay, so presentation and then
Yeah.
questions. Okay, so then the follow-up of that is, if principal use solar arrays should be regulated based on their size, would the proposed breakdown be acceptable? Less than 1 acre is by right, 1 to 5 acres conditional use, and larger than 5 acres is special use. Question 2 is, should accessory solar arrays be regulated the same as other accessory structures so that they would be permitted by right if they met the accessory structure requirements for that particular zoning district? And finally, should ground-mounted accessory solar arrays be excluded from gross floor area calculations? Moving into the second major question, where should they be permitted? Staff recommends allowing principal use solar arrays only in AG agricultural zoning areas to reduce conflicts between incompatible land uses. There are very few ag-zoned parcels in Urbana, probably about 12, all totaling 155 acres of land. 95 of those 155 acres is out at the closed Urbana landfill. There's also the 20-acre Berkey's Farm Implements parcel, and then the East Lawn Cemetery and land around Speed Lube, which is 18 acres. And there are some other smaller residential parcels. The proposal to allow principal use solar arrays only in the ag district is therefore should be seen as a longer-term consideration, which would allow larger arrays in the future on land that is currently outside the city boundaries. So if somebody wanted to annex into the city and put up a large solar array, they could do that because it would come into the city with its current agricultural zoning. While industrially zoned areas might seem logical for siting large solar arrays, even on an interim basis, staff consider them best used for uses that can make use of the existing infrastructure and can generate more tax revenue than a large-scale solar array would. Therefore, staff do not recommend allowing principal use solar arrays in an industrial zone. Moving on to accessory arrays. As I said, by definition, accessory solar arrays are designed to generate power for a nearby principal use, for example, Riggs Beer Company. Staff believe that accessory solar arrays should be permitted in all zoning districts as long as they meet all other relevant zoning regulations for accessory structures. And then, so the follow-up questions are, should principal use solar arrays be permitted only in ag districts, or should they be permitted in other districts? And should accessory solar arrays be permitted in all zoning districts as long as they comply with other zoning regulations, if not where? That ends the information, and then staff requests that Plan Commission continue the public hearing to August 8th, at which time a draft text amendment will be presented.
If they could vote on it, it'll automatically go to the next meeting, though.
It'll automatically go to the next meeting if continued. Okay. And then ultimately, we're going to shoot for that date for the actual amendment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Ricci? I do. Mr. Ackerson?
So I think I understand the rationale, but I'm puzzling a little bit in my
Sure.
head about, and I'm getting my terms mixed up, but the primary arrays, I could foresee, maybe not next year, but 5 to 10 years from now, some industrial users who would actually want a fairly large solar array.
Right.
You know, once all the ice has melted off of Greenland and so forth and so
Right.
on.
Yeah.
So help me with that process about, we don't want to, I understand we don't want to replace industrial that's there
Right.
and revenue generating,
Mhm.
but on an industrial site where they may want to use a fairly large array to run their
Right.
operations, similar to the small operation Riggs is using now. So help me think through that.
Regardless-
That's an accessory use.
Can I
Yeah.
That would-
piggyback on sort of a complementary thought?
Sure.
What if an existing user, and I don't know who it would be, but I wrote down Solo Cup, right now wants to put, I
Right.
don't know how big their building is, a 1-acre array on their roof?
That would be fine. That would be considered an accessory use,
Yeah.
just
Well,
like.
not if it's not, I mean, not if they're selling it back. If they have enough space to sell it back, it's a principal use. So, to me,
No.
as
Okay.
a comment, allowing this only in an ag district might be too limiting under certain circumstances.
So starting with Mr. Ackerson's question, as staff see and have seen in the other model zoning ordinances and actual zoning ordinances, if a solar array is designed to feed a nearby use,
Right,
that
it's
would be
accessory.
considered an accessory use regardless of its size.
Okay, that's what I wanted to
If Kraft wanted to put
Yeah.
a 20-acre solar array on top of its building, however large Kraft is, or if they wanted to cover all of their parking with solar, if it is going into the meter at the Kraft plant, that would be considered an accessory use.
Okay.
Any leftover would go to the grid and be banked for them. Now, if somebody says, okay, I use approximately 1 megawatt worth of generating throughout the year, but I'm going to sneak it in as an accessory use and build it a 5 megawatt size one. Well, this is the walk like a duck, talk like a duck. It's obvious that you're oversizing it so that you can put it onto the grid, and then it would be considered probably a second principal use on the same zoning lot.
And the rationale of why you would not want that on an industrial site is it's going to take up so much space, you could have some other manufacturing or industrial activity there?
And more about the fact that if roads were built to feed and to support larger, more intense industrial use, if water lines were put in, if sewer lines were put in, that's all going to go to waste on a solar farm that doesn't need any of that.
Mr. Fell, anything further? Mr. Weisskopf?
But like, I mean, if if an industrial park wants to go solar like that, I mean, the marketplace is going to kind of be the decider for them. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
Is that a comment or is there a question coming out?
there's a question coming out. I guess it's, yeah, I guess maybe that's more of a discussion thing.
Probably.
So let me ask my question then. And maybe it's not in your purview, but I'll ask it anyway. I'm familiar with the types of things like neighbors and people adjacent to solar wind farms talk, say, as a disincentive and reasons why they don't want that. Did you see it all, or have you researched it all, sort of in other jurisdictions? What people say who live next to them, like, do they have a bad rap? Do they get,
Everything has a bad rap.
right, they cause
Espe-
cancer? No, just kidding.
Right.
I mean,
Well,
but I mean,
I sat in
curious.
and reviewed the county's zoning text amendment, and there were discussions about glare and noise less discussions about property values and things like that. And there are debates. There's some scientific evidence about the glare and the noise levels and all of that. I think if you were to compare solar and wind, the solar would be less potential of a nuisance. There are studies about them not decreasing property values, that they, on the residential scale ones, that they make a house sell faster,
Right.
and that they sell for more, at least recouping the money that was on them. Again, we're not necessarily talking about concerns about residential scale, but large scale ones, which is one of the reasons why we're suggesting they only go in agricultural districts for those larger ones. And then the other built-in safety mechanisms are that anything that would be larger than an acre in size, if you select that as your recommended, scale, would require a conditional use permit, and anything larger than 5 acres in size would require a special use permit. Both of those processes allow the hearing body to put conditions on it, whether it's, you need setbacks of this rather than that, or shorter rather than this, or you need screening or whatever. So that's why we're not just saying permitted by right at any size in any district.
Thanks.
Any further questions? Mr. Fell?
I'm going to go to more the accessory use
Yeah.
part of it. So the first one is, we've addressed what happens with floor area ratio. What do we do with open space requirements? If you're a residential person, right?
Right.
You don't have room. I mean, you can't add a solar array to your house because you potentially now create a zoning violation because you don't have enough open space.
So the vast majority of solar arrays that go in are roof mounted, but not everybody wants to put a roof mounted one on, or their house might be nicely shaded to keep it cooler. It could be if you put on your typical open bottom underneath, it would be considered similar to a pergola, which is also not included in our open space
I think
requirements
we can
because
maybe,
it's open to the
as an
ground.
example, if you can put in your brain the one that's in Behringer Commons, he's got a solar thing that it's probably 20 by 20, maybe it's bigger than that.
Right.
That sits at an angle, it's way, it's not off the ground, it's a big structure.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess my question, or my point is, the staff need to consider what that does to the open space requirement. Because I think we're going to allow, we have the potential of allow people to add things to their property by right, and do we need a permit? I guess that's another question, that will make their property in violation of zoning ordinance. So I think we need to figure out how to make that not happen.
Right.
Okay? And point number 2 is, cities, the staff recommended, or at least in the presentation, was it would be allowed by right in all districts and accessory use. I think that, it's a question, I guess, does that open the city up for a little more aggravation than it wants in terms of what happens to the neighbor when I want to put a solar array on my roof and his trees are blocking my roof, but they're hanging over my yard, and I'm just going to clear cut them off. I mean, he has a right to do that, but does the neighbor also deserve a little bit of input on what happens here? Meaning, do we want to make all districts a special use or something that they have to come ask for it so that neighbors at least can voice an opinion about what's going to happen next to them?
Can we clarify whether roof-mounted solar arrays, this ordinance even applies to roof-mounted solar arrays at all? Are they considered part of the structure, and therefore, you mentioned that the height requirement could come in, that would be the only restriction there. Is that accurate, or to Mr. Fell's point is?
Well, I mean, my point is even on the ground. I don't care, it doesn't matter where they
Yeah,
are.
right, I get that, yeah.
I think staff's, belief is if it's treated as any other accessory structure is treated, if you wanted to do something else on your house that was going to increase its height by a foot, or you didn't like your neighbor's trees overhanging your yard, you wouldn't have to come to a public hearing to say, I want to cut my neighbor's trespassing tree down. So, you know.
No, I absolutely understand that. I
Right.
guess my point is, is this creating another level of citizens' ability to, I don't want to say complain, that's not the
Right.
right word, you know, to object to what's happening because they don't have a voice in what's happening and they think they should. And that's not going to be our problem, that's going to be your problem.
Right. Well, I duly noted, one of the things that is on our list to research is there is an Illinois Homeowners Solar Rights Act that was passed, I think, a couple years ago. It mostly addresses homeowners associations not being permitted to say you're not allowed to put up a solar array in your backyard through their covenants because it made it through whatever court that allowed that to get passed, because presumably the production of renewable energy is an important enough thing to the public at large, and saying you can't do it because you're part of this homeowners association isn't allowed. So I will definitely check into, you know, the impacts on the open space requirements. Maybe check out the one at Behringer Commons that's the large ground-mounted one. Is that Ty Newell's by any chance, or he's, okay. Okay.
Any further questions for Mr. Ricci? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I'm glad you're taking this up.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And if you come up with any other concerns later, please call, email.
Hopefully, everything will come out right now. Thank you. Anybody wish to address the commission? Guessing not. Okay. Public input is closed. Discussion. So let's just start, I guess let's just go through the questions. And then at the end, if there's anything that the questions don't cover, we'll take those up. So question 1A, should principal use solar arrays be regulated based on their size? Small arrays permitted by right, larger arrays permitted with conditional or special use? If not, what other way?
To me, that seems a logical way to do it. My only,
Oh,
I'm sorry. To
Oh,
me,
he's
that,
got it.
it's on, I just lean it
Ah.
back. That seems like a logical way to do it. My only reservation is, it's just too ambiguous and leaves too much open for somebody to try to circumvent the regulations. That's my concern, perhaps it's not city staff's concern.
Anybody else on that?
I can't think of a better way to do it at the moment.
No, I can't either.
So,
That sounds fine. to me.
Unless I had the answer, I only
So
have.
the, so the
Yeah.
general approach, question 1A, we agree with the general approach. Question 1B, the proposed breakdown of 1 acre by right, 1 to 5 acre conditional, 5+ acre special use. To me, this seems arbitrary. And I've been thinking about this. I think the approach is in the right direction, but I would almost like to see it based on the size of the array in relation to the size of the parcel. In other words, you know, almost like a floor area ratio thing, where it's, you know, X percent of the square footage.
Well, this one's
something.
for the primary
This-
user, right?
correct,
So
correct.
I'm not sure, and
Or do we even want to
I don't
limit
think we
it
want
at
to,
all?
I don't think we want to limit that, because the idea, I mean, I could see a primary user is going to go aggregate as much land as he can to put this thing on there, and he wants every square inch. And if it's next to a cornfield, that's okay,
It's perfectly fine.
right?
yeah.
He can go to the edge of it if it's a cornfield.
Sure.
So,
So do we want it all just to be special use with, you know, with the discretion of the plan commission and, you know, or do we want to have at least some guidelines? If it's this big, you have to do X. If it's this big, you have to do Y.
I'm okay with,
You know,
I'm okay with having some small amount by right, but I'm trying to think through the idea. You were talking talk closer. You were talking about being proportional. So like, if it's 1 acre out of a 4-acre lot as opposed to 1 acre out of a 10 or 20 or
And what's next to it,
100-acre lot.
you know, what's the context?
Right.
I mean, if
right.
it, like, I don't know, how, 41 acres out on the landfill property, how big was that total property? I mean, to me, that was a perfect example of how to do a principal use solar array.
The proposed array was 41 acres, but it wasn't on the entire, spread out on the entire
Correct,
property.
yeah.
There were 3 parcels, and it was pretty much completely covering the eastern 2 parcels, leaving the western parcel.
Reasonably open, yeah.
Right. And again, I'll just point out, as Mr. Fell said, if this is a principal use, you know, is there a reason not to cover
The whole
as
thing,
much as
if you want,
possible?
yeah.
But the question is, at what rate do you want to go from permitted by right to conditional to special?
Would it make sense to do something permitted by right? Well, I don't know. It's really a different thing for we're describing as a principal user whose ultimate goal is just to sell this power,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
So I see very few instances where someone trying to do that is going to say, oh, I'm only going to use 10% of my property. I think if any
Probably
of the,
true.
I think any primary user sort of should be under the same coverage guidelines, I'll say, but should they come here if it's more than an acre? I guess that's the issue to me. I think in my mind, we treat them all the same zoning-wise, right?
Mhm.
Of coverage of
Sure.
lot and things like that. It's just, at what point do they have to come?
For a special use
Yeah,
or whatever
come-
kind of purpose.
Yeah, make sure it's okay to do one that big. I don't know what that number is. And maybe it's
don't either.
more than 1 acre. Maybe that's the answer.
Would it be helpful for staff to bring you like some examples of the sizes of existing other principal uses and, you know, the organization that built it, like whether it's Ameren versus a church
Yeah.
that is putting one together, or a farm co-op that's putting one together for its folks, or a large utility versus a small utility?
Right.
Okay. And again, this is for the principal use
Sure,
ones only.
Yeah.
I think examples would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
But but we are saying, like, ultimately, we are trying to encourage this use, correct? I mean,
I
we're-
think that at least enable, if not encourage. Yeah.
right. I mean, from my perspective, I think we should do everything we can to try and bring it closer to the point where it's worth it for somebody to do that with their land.
Yeah.
And I guess, I mean, we're talking about the special use and that requirement as a way to kind of vet it for potential conflicts with adjacent parcels or neighbors and having their say, like you said. But yeah, just ultimately, I mean, I'm for trying to do the best we can to bring closer that, you know, the point, make it more economically feasible for people to do this with their parcels, and not more difficult. But I don't think we're making it more difficult. I'm just saying, like, how somebody arranges their array, yeah, like floor, you know, just, I'm babbling. I made the point.
Well, I don't know how you guys feel. I'm inclined just to make them all special uses. The by right option, I think, is the attempt to try to make this easy for somebody who wants to do it.
Right.
So I appreciate that, but as to Mr. Fell's point, if you're going to limit it to a small portion of the property and their intent is to sell power, who's going to do it? I mean, that was rhetorical.
And I'll also point out again that, or mention, Champaign County's recent zoning text amendment was to permit these in Ag 1 or Ag 2 districts as a special use. So all of theirs come through as a special use for principal solar arrays. So it isn't, this would not be something new that you're thinking.
Yeah.
To make them all special
Well,
uses.
that's what I'm inclined. Anybody, we can't vote, but we can do straw polls.
I would be more in favor of that option than the way it was presented.
This just seemed a little arbitrary to me. So straw poll, how many people would prefer that just to have the special use requirement without the additional size limitation on conditional, special, or use by right? Raise your hand.
I'm just undecided because I probably would favor that. I'm thinking, well, 1 acre, sure, that's fine, but then I'm struggling with who's going to do this kind of a project on just 1 acre of land. But if you were, why not? Why not allow them to do it? So examples would be helpful to me because I'm working blind here.
Yeah,
with the
examples would be
idea,
helpful,
Yeah.
but-
But
Okay.
I'm leaning in your direction.
At least that's maybe a little guidance on
Yeah.
that. Question 2, should solar arrays be regulated the same as accessory structures? So they'd be permitted by right if they meet the accessory structure requirements in the zoning district. If not, are there any other suggestions? And I want to add to that, this is not a question, but I think before we answer this question, we need to ask the question, is the accessory primary structure rule acceptable? In other words, is the selling to the grid, make it primary, using it for the primary use, make it accessory? I mean, I like it.
Yeah, yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah, that makes
But
sense
just,
to me.
because this goes to your point, what happens if Solo Cup decides, we want to put a giant solar array on the roof, and we're going to use 10% of the power, or whatever, and we're going to sell the other 90%, making it essentially another primary use on the same
Right.
parcel, which goes to your text amendment, by the way. Yeah. So,
I guess to me, to that point, I wouldn't consider a solar array, let's use Solo Cup, on the roof of Solo Cup as a second principal structure. I don't, to me, it's not.
that's the question I'm
right?
asking.
It's I don't know what it is, but it's not to me, it's not a structure, I guess.
And that's where.
A use, I'm sorry, not a structure, yeah.
Well, I
a
mean, you
second
can't, well, you
principal
can't,
use.
yeah, but there's, well, that's a building code issue, I guess,
Sure.
not really a zoning issue.
Yeah.
It has the same language,
Yeah.
kind of.
So what I was thinking is the selling to the grid, I like it, but does there have to be like a minimum, like 50%, 50 plus 1%? Selling to the grid makes you primary, and less than that makes it accessory.
My opinion would be we let city staff kind of come up with what that is, because what happens, I mean, as a percentage, that might be bad. What happens?
I don't know what the
when I go on
percentage is.
vacation and I'm using no power and 90% of
90%
the power
is
of my
going to
solar
the
thing that I don't use all of normally is now given back. Then you know.
50% is just,
So, right, I mean,
my point is I like the idea of using the purpose of the array. Does there need to be some other criteria that further limits, further defines the purpose of the array? And if any other ordinances that you know of have that might be.
well, and again, to me, this example of Solo Cup is I don't feel we should limit it to any zoning district necessarily. I mean, there's
Okay,
not going to be
that's
very many people in,
number
you
4.
know, R2 that want to build a 3-acre solar array, but
Sure.
someone may want to do something on a large building or Flexingate, you know?
Sure, yeah. Okay, so now, if something is, by whatever criteria, ruled to be an accessory structure, is that the appropriate way to treat them? In other words, if you've got a garage and a shed and a solar array, should they be added together to determine this is your complete square footage of accessory structure?
To me, because I deal with kind of this algebra every day,
I'll bet.
I want city staff to revisit this because it makes a big difference in a lot of things.
I would think.
I have no recommendation, but it needs a little bit of clarity, to me, of what, I mean, particularly, I mean, I'm struggling, I can grasp the floor area ratio issues, the open space ratios, I can't, because that's going to be a harder problem to deal with, and that's a problem that can be sort of retroactively inserted into a piece of property.
So this is a discussion question that I would ask you to think about that would play into the research that I do. And it's about the philosophy of the open space ratio requirement. You know, why do we require a certain amount of space on the property to not be covered by a building or stuff that you drive on versus stuff that you walk on? That's all eligible for open space or not eligible for open space. Is it about stormwater drainage, or is it about visual impact? And the answers to those questions would then help inform how do we treat a solar array. Because again, it could be treated like, seen as a carport if it happens to be got 4 posts and a set of solar panels on top. It's a carport. If there's a picnic table underneath, like Riggs did, it's a pergola. If it's all open to the ground for stormwater to drain to, it's not the same thing as a slab garage or a slab house because it's not impeding stormwater. So do you exclude it from the open space ratio because it's not impacting stormwater infiltration, or do you include it in it because it's still a visually impacting structure? So that's kind of, if you have any off-the-cuff opinions about that, that would be helpful.
Well, I do, because the zoning ordinance, at least partially, I could be wrong, but I don't think I am, it might be Champaign, partially states that open space is for recreation.
That's not here.
No.
I mean, to me, that you'd have to get pretty detailed in terms of defining what kinds of solar arrays and what configuration, contribute to open space or detract from it, or don't, or whatever the case may be. And I was thinking about that very case. What if I've got a bunch of solar arrays that are spread out and they're on poles, and rainwater can get to the ground? I don't know the answer to that. I think you could be going down a rabbit hole if you start to do that.
Well, absolutely, because there are other items that, if they're covered, don't count as open space.
Sure, exactly, yeah. So just to say it's an accessory doesn't really answer any questions about that, does it? Right.
So again, I have no answers or recommendations, I just see a potential problem.
Staff will bring you back more info.
Thank you. We're not helping much, I don't think. Ground-mounted, should ground-mounted accessory solar arrays be excluded from floor area calculations?
That was easier for
Yes.
me.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yes.
I agree. Yep, no problem. Okay, the big one. Should principal use solar arrays be permitted only in ag districts or also in other zoning districts? And remember, we just said it's all special use.
Yeah, I would
So-
think as a special use, we just,
Any non-residential?
yeah. I mean, well,
I mean, maybe-
guess define residential, I think any district.
Anything but,
I mean,
well, not principal use in a residential? you
Sure,
think?
if they have enough space to
That's
do it.
crazy.
I mean, well, I
I
don't
know.
know how big some of the buildings are, but
Well, I guess-
the atrium apartments.
If we're
I mean,
talking.
is that an acre? It might be.
Yeah, sure, I can, I get you.
Now, again, this is for principal use, not accessory use.
Right.
So
Correct.
if
Correct.
the argument is that the Atrium Apartments is putting it on their building to feed their building,
But what if they don't? What if
if they want to
sell
oversize it,
I
then it
mean,
would be a principal. So completely understood.
It could happen.
Yeah, it could happen. It probably won't ever happen, but it could.
Yeah.
I think you'll stir up more resistance to this if you treat residential the same as others. I'd be more open to doing it for everything except residential. Do I get the philosophy you're getting at?
I think I would be okay with that, but not every R use. I mean, R1, R2, R3, but not R6. Or do we have R6 here?
Yeah, 7 and 80.
I wish you people would quit
So
changing
ma-
zoning
so-
ordinances.
So maybe there's a cutoff there, yeah.
Well, I would definitely think the residential argument is hard, but in the higher density residential districts, I might be able to live with it. I certainly think that if we're going to special use it, then we would have the jurisdiction and the judgment to be able to determine in this industrial use or commercial or whatever.
And just my thought, and this is just a thought, don't have any information behind it, but my thought is, if they're gonna go to a fairly significant solar array in a denser residential building or complex, they're gonna be using it for that building. I can't,
Very
they
likely.
would have to construct something pretty big to go beyond the needs of that building.
Very likely. Anything further on these topics? And I think we basically just hit question 4 and question 5, because question 5 is, should it be allowed in all zoning districts as long as they comply with the zoning regulations? That was question 5, which I think we just kind of
As
touched
the
on.
accessory one, or the?
This is, this is accessory, I'm sorry. Should accessory solar arrays be permitted in all zoning districts as long as they comply with the other regulations?
Sure.
I think so, but
Sure,
I
why
think
not?
I think they need a special use permit, too.
I think so. Even in residential? Anywhere?
I mean, maybe that's worth some kind of size limitation, perhaps. But I just see lots of citizen upheaval potential when someone puts one of these things in.
Residential
Does
could be,
some-
yeah, exactly.
I will point out that we're already permitting them right now without special use permits.
Right.
In residential districts.
Got one two
Because we don't
houses
have,
down from me, yeah.
Well, if somebody wants to shingle their roof, we don't make them come to Plan Commission and
Right.
City Council to shingle their roof.
I'm 2 houses down from a
Well,
house
I-
like that and walk my dog by it every day, and I've never heard my neighbors complain. Now, my neighbors next door to me are good friends of
Yeah.
ours, and there are other things they complain about that yard, like their leaves get in our yard. I've never once heard them mention the solar arrays.
this is
and
why I asked the
issues,
question
so-
about the roof versus the
Yeah.
freestanding.
Right.
Which to me is an important distinction.
Distinction, yeah.
I could put a solar array on my roof just like I could shingle it. I can't put a big structure in my yard.
You
That-
can with our zoning ordinance.
Probably, but we're now working on that, right?
Well, I don't think that it's anyone's intention to
Keep people from doing what they can.
reverse what we already have, because several years ago, there was a text amendment in order to specifically mention ground-mounted solar and give them a few extra permissions than, let's say, if you were to build a garage.
Yeah.
So you can do things that are a little more flexible with ground-mounted solar. So we wouldn't necessarily want to go backwards. I don't know that staff anyway wants to go backwards on that one, so just wanted to be sure I pointed that out.
People are putting in ground-mounted solar arrays. They're getting their
Sure.
building permit. Riggs went through an extensive structural engineering, sign-off process. They get the electrical permit. It's got to meet the yard setback requirements. We treated it as an accessory. Actually, we treated it as a principal structure for that case to make sure it was far enough away from the property lines. But again, if somebody was putting up a pole barn, which some folks think are pretty and some folks don't think are pretty, would you require them to come to, in the middle of your backyard, would you require that person who wants to put up that pole barn or that 4-car garage to come to Plan Commission and to City Council to get a special use permit? How is a pole barn any different from a ground-mounted solar array? End of statement, question, actually.
To me, it's not.
Yeah. As long as it's an accessory structure, and I really think we should draw a distinction between freestanding and roof-mounted, but I defer to if anybody
Well,
else.
I thought it already was. I
I was a little unclear.
I thought roof-mounted already was allowed.
It is.
without
Oh, it's
any-
allowed.
So roof-mounted would not be, roof-mounted anything's accessory structure is if you wanted to put a deck on top of your house. It would not impact the floor area ratio, it would impact the open space ratio, it would not
That's
add
what I agree.
into the accessory structure square footage maximum of 750 square feet. But if you put that garage or whatever on the ground and it's ground mounted, then brings up the discussion about do we say that it gets included in that accessory square footage calculation? Different jurisdictions treat it differently.
Yeah. I think maybe in the definition, I assume you're going to add a definition
Yes.
to the zoning.
For both.
Right, exactly.
What's included as a definition right now of an accessory structure?
I don't have mine.
Accessory structure is a structure housing an accessory use. So the defining term is
Yeah, there you go. It
structure.
doesn't house a
So
use,
that's
right?
something
Yeah.
that is
To me, it's-
permanently affixed to the ground,
Right.
if you then go to the definition of structure.
So somebody
Correct. Okay.
somebody builds
Okay.
a cover structure for their RV next to their house, which I think is ungodly, but they decide to take down that structure and put up solar panels, which I think are heavenly. They're treated the same, right?
They would be under the proposed,
That's my
Amendment, yes.
Correct.
I'm being a little colorful.
no, that's
but you
fine.
get my
If
point.
somebody tore down their cedar pergola
Right.
and they put up a cedar post with solar panels on the top and used that as a pergola, they would both be excluded from the gross floor area calculation because pergolas aren't considered a structure because they're open, more so than a carport or a garage. It all gets into building code stuff that I'm not familiar
Yeah.
with. So we need to be very clear in all of those definitions.
So the proposal is to somehow define what makes a solar array an accessory structure,
Right,
and then treat it like all other accessory structures.
right.
Actually, that makes sense to me. Pretty much.
I'm going to disagree in a way, because
It's going to
To
impact
me-
your garage and your.
well,
and
to me,
everything
it doesn't really, as a practical matter, I don't think it should be included in your aggregate amount of accessory use structures. I think it should be excluded from that.
And
Because
there,
it's not really, the intent is not the same of what it provides you, I guess, right? And it's, the accessory structure can be lots of things, but
Sure.
typically it's a garage or it's a shed or
Yeah.
it's something like that. And this is not, this
Yeah.
doesn't serve that purpose. So I'm comfortable with having a solar array that's ground mounted excluded from your aggregate accessory use area. However, I'm still going to be hung up on what this thing does to our open space, because we need a concrete, defined answer for that.
So.
Which would
so
require
what I'm-
detailed guidelines.
So my shed I have in my backyard, I keep the lawnmower in and whatnot. If I put solar panels on the top of that thing, fine. There's nothing's affected. What you're suggesting is if I took that shed out and put just a standing solar array right there, it's okay? It's
Yeah,
not
but
okay?
what I'm saying is,
It would be,
what I'm saying is
leave
you
your
can
shed.
leave the
Yeah.
shed. You can leave the shed and put the
and
solar
just
up.
put the solar up.
However, you cannot put the solar up if now
You don't have the.
you
open
don't meet the
space.
open space requirement.
Got it.
And I,
Now, how about this as a compromise? You treat it like an accessory unless and so that's by right, unless it causes you to exceed the open space requirement, and then it becomes a special use.
well, I have another way around this.
Possibly?
Well,
Okay.
I think we still need a definition of a special use, but is a permit required to put in a solar array? If
an
we-
electrical and a building permit are
A
currently.
building permit is required?
Yes.
So that,
In that
if we have the
process.
language, we have a built-in review of what this does to open space, as long as we have a
That's
definition
true.
of what
That's
happens.
true.
They can't, no one, someone will do it, but theoretically, you're not allowed to just go build one without getting permission first.
Yeah.
So because some of the question was around open space and what is and what isn't, going to the zoning ordinance, to count as open space, a chunk of land has to have a minimum dimension of 15 by 15 feet. We're just going to run down the list. So if you have a little tuft of yard that's 5 feet, that doesn't count as open space. So we take out all those little side yards. At least 50% of such area has to be in live plantings or grass or whatever. No more than 50% of such area can be covered by paving for sidewalks, leisure and recreational areas, such as patios, tennis courts, and swimming pools, and you can't ever include parking, drives, or loading areas. So you got your house lot, you take out the house and all of the structures, you take out all the driveways, you can include the sidewalks and patios and whatever, as long as they're less than 50% of the remaining area. If you've bricked over your entire lot, you only get to count half of it as open space. So if you put up I guess in this case, if you kept with our same definition, if you took that solar panel and you put it in a turf area, it gets gray, and that's where we're coming to you for guidance. If the purpose of this is to, provide recreation, escape from daily woes, that's one thing. If it's to maintain stormwater drainage, that's another. If you have a large solar array, it might be acting the same as having a large pergola or a large garage. But if you're worried about stormwater drainage, it's not impacting that. So the question, it doesn't exclude any other, it doesn't say does not include your pergola. But I think normally we would exclude it from the open space ratio calculation as open space. To clarify, a solar array would not be considered open space, according to how we would interpret it right now. If somebody walked in and said, I want to put a wing on my house, please recalculate my open space ratio, and they had a solar array that covered 500 square feet of their backyard, we'd say, sorry, that solar array isn't considered open space. It's also not considered gross living area, but it's also not considered open space.
Well, then I think we need to say that in the ordinance. I mean,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Could, well, yeah. Yes, we do.
Yeah. Anything further on this from us? I mean, we've gone through the questions. Until we get something more concrete, I think we're kind of done. Did we give you enough, Mr. Ricci, to be able to move forward?
Yes, and you didn't scream or holler and say absolutely not, so that's a wonderful sign.
No. I did have one question. I mean, this will, all the setbacks and other things will apply just like anything else, right? Great. Height, setback.
If it's a principal use solar array, it would meet the principal use setbacks. If it's an accessory use solar array, it would be the same as a garage, which is currently allowed up to 18 inches from a property line.
Okay. I'm fine with that. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. In that case, we will automatically continue this to the next Plan Commission meeting. If there's no further progress on the ordinance, we will then continue it to, I guess, probably August 8th of 2019, or in thereabouts. So, thank you. All right. Plan case number 2377 T19, application by the zoning administrator to amend Article 2, Article 5, Article 6, Article 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, and 13 to make other changes, to do cleanup and make other changes that are deemed necessary to provide clarity and ease of administration. Ms. Wilcox.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for talking zoning ordinance changes, omnibus changes with me tonight. I appreciate it. Did everybody get the supplemental memo and read it? All right. Extra question there. That's awesome. We will talk more about that a little bit later into this. I'm going to go over the changes that are being proposed in the zoning ordinance to better clarify the everyday regulation of the zoning ordinance. Most of these changes are ones that we've noticed throughout using the zoning ordinance and talking to people in the city, and we want to help make things more efficient and reflect what we're trying to accomplish with the zoning ordinance, fix typos, clear things up. So there are 7 articles amended, and Tyler already mentioned those. For the presentation, since we're reading off of the screen, the text that is unchanged is just in red. The added text is bold and underlined, and then removed text is in black and has a strike through. So trying to clear it up and make it a little bit easier to read as we go through some of these. The first ones are really just table of contents that will naturally change if the Plan Commission and City Council approves the amendment. So I just want to list those here. It would be an added figure, and then we change some of the numbering in Historic Preservation article. The first article that has changes in it is Article 2, definitions. It's spring, almost summer, so carports and garages are a great time to talk about that as people come in with building permits or ideas of garages and carports. Staff is recommending proposing a change to the definition of carport. It's a structure with one or more open sides designed to shelter vehicles. So that would be admitting the belonging to occupants of the dwelling. And instead of automobiles, many people sometimes just store bicycles and other things, just vehicles, if we're really going to get that specific. Garage, private, a detached accessory building or a portion of a principal building designed to house vehicles on the lot on which the garage is located or other specified dwelling. The term shall also include carports. So previously, the carport would have to be attached to the dwelling. Garages can either be attached or detached. This would allow for the definition of carport to also apply to carports that are detached. And owner, we've added this, and this really will get to the changes of in the Historic Preservation article. Owner, a person having a legal or equitable interest in real personal property or real property. The terms person, personal property, and real property have meaning set forth in Urbana City Code Section 1-3 as amended. Historic Preservation had multiple definitions of owner kind of floating around. We wanted to really clear that up and use one term to mean the same thing. And if it was different, we would specify. Major variance, a deviation from the regulations or standards of the Urbana zoning ordinance other than a minor variance that does not vary the use regulations. This definition had probably not been touched in a while. It still uses the term Board of Zoning Appeals, which we have a zoning board of appeals in Urbana, but also we thought that we could actually kind of clarify it a little bit by removing a lot of extra text about the city council and everything. So minor variance, a deviation from the regulations or standards of the Urbana zoning ordinance that the zoning board of appeals may grant for specific and selected purposes. So again, this also had Board of Zoning Appeals, automatically showed up as a red flag, and then when taking a look at it a little bit further, we thought we could clarify things. Article 5, use regulations, and this is really what gets into the supplemental memo. Section 2, 5.2, principal and accessory uses. Now I will say, for the purposes of looking at this does look a little bit clearer when we have it out of Section 5-2, out of Section 5-3 and into this. I do have as a exhibit in here the previous and the old one. You can kind of see where what we were taking from 5.3 and moving to 5.2. I'm going to go through this. A and B were left untouched. We added C, and again, this is moving it from Section 5-3 into above the accessory use and structure and the long list that goes underneath it of talking about accessory uses and structures to talk about principal structures. In any zoning district, more than one principal structure per lot may be as follows: by right if the uses are permitted by right in the district, or as a conditional use if one or more of the uses are allowed with a conditional use permit or special use if one or more of the uses are allowed with a special use permit in the district, and the lot does not qualify as a residential, commercial, or industrial PUD. Before issuing the building permit, the zoning administrator might require the owner to sign a covenant running with the land stating the lot and new structure cannot be subdivided without meeting subdivision requirements of the city. If so, the zoning administrator shall record the covenant at the owner's expense. 5, exceptions. Just really to expel any worries of density changes. In the R1 or R2 zoning district, a conditional use permit is required to establish a second principal structure. B, in R3 zoning district, no more than 2 principal structures are allowed. And this is really kind of coming out of a hope of an efficiency change. We've had a lot of conditional use permits for 2 principal structures in R3. The supplemental memo pulls out, mentions 4, one of them just recently passed, and this would, in R3, if someone said they wanted to build a garage apartment or mother-in-law suite, they would be allowed to. By right, the zoning administrator might ask them to record a covenant, making sure that on a title search, something would show up, a red flag of sorts, to say, hey, you know, this is not a separate lot. This is actually, you bought someone else, part of someone else's property, and creates a whole lot of other issues right there. So we're trying to kind of also meet that future land use need. We have seen that problem happen in the county, and it's also happened in the city, especially when the city annexes county property, and we inherit some of those issues.
Can I ask a question about this one?
Yeah, yeah,
You use the word may.
yes. Where?
What you're thinking on, in number 4, the zoning administrator may require a covenant?
Yeah, absolutely. Lori would love to answer it.
So I'm not sure if you are picturing this, but I'll try to walk you through some of these examples. So let's say you have a lot that's on the corner, and they've got, you know, the house up front and then a garage with an apartment above it to the side because it's a corner lot. So if you're driving down the street, you might say, oh, look, it's 2 buildings, that's 2 lots. So in that instance, it would be a great idea for the zoning administrator to say, we can approve this new garage apartment, but you need to record a covenant that says this is 1 lot, you cannot subdivide unless you're meeting the rules of the city. Because much like Marcus's, if it quacks like a duck, you know, looks like a duck example, that we don't want anyone to drive by and say, that's, you know, that obviously is 2 lots, I'm going to, you know, deed away half of it illegally.
Yeah.
So we put may in there because there could be an instance where really an average person would not think that it is a subdividable lot. Do you see what I'm saying?
I think so, but
I don't think this is your intent, but I will say in a neighboring municipality, these things have to be recorded on your deed or you do not get a building permit. Do we want to require that? So, I mean, we don't want to say, this would be a great idea to do this, please do it, and have no authority. Now, I can think of a couple examples that when I've been on the commission where we've allowed something to happen, and you know one of these, that was a gentleman's agreement. Well, one of these pieces of property is no longer owned by one of these gentlemen. And there's not a problem, but there could be, because we've allowed things to just go, we trust you, right?
Well, we can certainly, maybe we'll kind of run through some what-ifs with the legal division to see if putting will record, you know, is a
Shall,
problem.
whatever, yeah.
Is a problem. I mean, off the top of my head, I don't think it would be, but, you know, that's a good point. Thank you. We at least wanted to be able to request it, so thank you for the support on that one.
And that's the only problem I have with this thing, guys, so.
That's really good to hear. To imagine too. It's really good feedback for me. So I'll
Yeah.
go and ask legal about that. Yeah, I've heard since I've started working here, only by 7 months or so, I've seen a couple of illegal subdivisions and the problems that the people who are living in it and trying to do things on it. It's
Yeah.
a mess.
No, we don't want it.
Okay, so D, that just pushes D down, so
Yeah.
that was the change. For section 5.3, we crossed that out. The purpose of that section was to talk about the table of permitted uses, and though, there are some other things in that section that are kind of similar, it makes more sense for it to go about principal, and then right underneath it, talk about accessory structures. So we are recommending to change that. For section 5.5, additional use regulations in the R6B district, there you go, Andrew, there's your R6. That's one of two. The requirement of section, that's just changing the number to the section that they're meaning to refer to. So
Yeah,
it's,
yeah, I think that a lot of these changes, if they're just, strictly to make the zoning ordinance internally consistent and conform to itself, and several of these changes you make once and then you make several times, like the zoning board of appeals versus the, whatever it said before.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
could just kind of blow through those, if you don't
yeah,
mind.
absolutely. Well, that's this section for sure. This is just,
Because I
overlay
I read
zoning
it,
district.
and other than the principal structures, I'm not sure there's anything, is there anything else that's like really substantive?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you kind of saw a couple of extra words put in the, ooh, and you can tell me if it wasn't or not.
No, there's
That's
the
not
thing
substantive.
about the city council, yeah.
Oh, that I don't think was meant to be. Oh, yeah. Conditional use, I think it comes in here. I hope I'm
Yeah,
getting
yeah,
this
this is the
correct.
other one.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
So for this part, the secretary to the zoning board of appeals shall prepare a decision sheet that states the board's finding, in fact, the decision, the requested conditional use of the board chair's signature, and then the last thing is that the zoning administrator shall notify the petitioner in writing the board's decision recording a conditional use. If the board approves the conditional use, the secretary of the board shall record the decision approving the conditional use with the Champaign Recorder's Office and forward a copy. That's just stating kind of the procedure that we are doing.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, that's just a
But it's just
procedural.
putting it in there so that, yeah, that
A
makes
lot
sense.
of this is procedural.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
this was the other one.
This is the,
Yeah.
so 7.4, special use. So city council shall consider a recommendation from the plan commission regarding the special use and may authorize the zoning administrator to issue the special use by adopting an ordinance by majority vote of alderpersons then holding office. In the event of a tie, the mayor may cast a deciding vote. Lori can speak to this much better than I can.
It's
but-
state law, so we decided just to put it in here so we didn't have to talk about it every
I
time.
thought it was that way, so.
And I think it was a
Just
question that
clarifying
came up.
just clarifying the zoning ordinance, yeah.
Yeah,
Perfect. That's what these things are supposed to do.
right. Is there any other questions about the, because again, we have a decision sheet, special use.
Yeah, those were the ones that jumped out at me as possibly having substance and that are,
Typo.
several times are, you had to make the change several times
Yeah.
throughout the thing.
The only thing that I would consider substantive, but if you can guys, please tell me whether you think it isn't. Right here, we have accessory. At the bottom of this page slide, accessory off-street parking may be located in the required side yard and rear yard, provided that the parking is located behind the front face
Oh,
of the
yeah.
principal structure. So that was a little bit of a change. It's really to reflect that not all lots are big rectangles or squares, and a lot of lots, sometimes how they're being built and how they would be done would make it very hard for anyone to have a garage or any kind of off-street parking structure with a lot that looks like an almond or a lot that looks like irregular shapes. Some neighborhoods, you can see that clearly the form of the neighborhood has the garage is behind. Most of those lots are actually very long rectangles, though. Where we have some neighborhoods where they were maybe platted and subdivided in like the 50s and onwards, we have a lot of different shapes and curvy roads. And in order to, the street frontage, it's
Sure.
not a problem, but in the back, it would be a problem.
Can you, or maybe Mr. Feld, help me understand what this means? So I've got a garage beside my house,
Yeah.
and now the zoning ordinance said it has to be behind the house, even
It
though it's
currently
beside it,
said-
but it's behind the rear face?
And
but
we're
now
not
you can
talking
move it up?
garages, right? We're talking
We're
just
talking
a
just parking spaces.
pad.
Parking.
Yeah, parking
So,
pad
yeah, so
spaces.
I got a driveway,
Right.
and I can park beside my house now, up to the front of it. But I can't park in front of it, because I know a lot of people who park in front of their house.
That's a whole hour-long conversation. I'd love to talk to you about it at another time.
This guy built a beautiful house,
That
and
is
now
it.
he's parked his truck like that, and I'm like, okay, now I understand, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's.
I have
sounds
one,
good. Mr.
one
Fell?
comment. I know you
Yeah.
tried, the intent was to pare this down, but now the definition of an owner is a person. Is an owner, I mean, an
A
owner is a
person-
person or an entity or persons?
Yeah,
Yeah. So the
Good
point of that is to, I completely see what you're saying. The point of that was really to specify what kind of, because sometimes we do refer to personal property as opposed to real property. Most of the time in the zoning ordinance, we talk about real property. And so for the historic preservation ordinance, if you read what the intent was, you can kind of, you know whether it was real property, and I think a lot of this was real property that they were referring to. What the problem with the historic preservation is that we just had 4 different definitions for it: the parcel owner, the owner of record. There were a lot of different, 2 that were defined, and then 4 different references. And so we're just trying to clear up the
I think your
verbiage.
point is that it says a person rather than a person or organization.
Yeah, it's just
I'm looking
you're-
up the city code because there is reference to the city code there, because I'm
Because
guessing
there are
the
lots
city
of times when,
code takes care of it.
you know, we have to,
Maybe.
forms have to be filled out that are signed by an owner, okay? But there's another form that says this owner is a LLC, or this owner
Yeah.
is a something else, and we have to get more forms from all the owners. So I don't know if it's too limiting or not.
I think it could be. Lori's looking something up.
Yeah.
I'm looking up the city code for
You
each
can
of
read
these
the city
words.
code on your phone?
Yes.
Wow.
Definition of person, according to the city code, the word person means any individual, partnership, corporation, joint stock association of, or any city or state or any subdivision thereof, and includes any trustee, receiver, assignee, or personal representative thereof.
Okay. That does it. That's about anything, about anything, other than cattle and so forth. Okay. Anything else that you want to call our attention to in
Probably the
here?
electronic sign.
Yes.
Electronic
Oh my
signage.
goodness, electronic sign, and it makes a lot of sense. Well, you can tell me. So
9-2,
yeah, 9-4.
9-4.
9-2 is just getting rid of a reference to the MUTCD that MUTCD explicitly
Oh, okay.
says they don't regulate. So, but yeah, 9-4 general sign allowance. Electronic display signs, freestanding signs, and wall signs authorized by this article in B3, general business, and CRE, conservation, recreation, education, zoning districts, and institutional freestanding signs authorized by this article in B4, central business zoning district, may include an element of electronic display when designed and operated to meet the following requirements.
Yeah.
So for the same reason why we allow it in CRE, there's churches in CRE, there's schools in CRE. There's also in B4, there's churches, there's schools. So for non-commercial, institutional, and we do define institutional freestanding signs, they would seem to need the same kind of requirements.
But if I had a commercial sign in B4, is that excluded from this definition then?
It is, yeah. So that would not include like a bank, because that,
Sure.
we do define institutional and,
So
yeah, thank you for pulling this.
if I have a tavern
Oh, no.
with
I should grab
a
it.
neon sign, it's not going to be regulated by the electronic sign ordinance? Is that what
If you had
this
a
is
neon
saying?
sign?
Oh, well, yeah, an electronic display.
Electronic
yeah,
display sign?
yeah.
No, it would,
Is that
I'm
what
sorry,
this is
what are
saying?
you asking?
I'm saying in the B4, if
Yeah.
it just says institutional freestanding signs, does
For-
would that include a commercial sign is what I'm asking?
It
Yeah, and
would
that's what
not.
I think too. That's what I
Yeah.
think this language says.
So in here, in Article 9, we define institution as a non-commercial.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe we might want to discuss that a little bit. I'm not sure, what are the implications of that?
So like a
They're
church
not
in
regulated by the
B4.
electronic sign ordinance, right?
What?
It means that a commercial electronic sign would not be regulated by the electronic sign ordinance?
No, it would be regulated. They're not allowed.
Oh, they're not allowed at all?
They're
Today,
not.
they're not allowed. We are suggesting that institutional uses be allowed to do a
Institutional uses be allowed, but
to have a
so commercial's still
freestanding
out.
electronic message board,
Thank
yes.
you, because that's what that's what I
Yes.
was wondering.
We
I've-
did do a count in the B4 district, and there are 13 entities that would be considered an institution
Yeah, I
that would
believe it,
be
yeah.
eligible for an institutional freestanding.
But if I
sign.
have a nice commercial sign on, affixed to my structure, yeah, okay.
You cannot add an electronic element to it.
Okay. I'm
Well, I
not sure
think
about
that's
that, but that's a different discussion.
Okay.
Okay, anything else, Ms. Wilcock?
That's,
That's
those
the
were
substantive
the,
parts?
yeah.
Okay, does anybody, with the further question about, with the question of personhood being resolved, and I think that you can look into the shall versus may in the covenant. Are there any other things we want to impart to city staff? Nope. Thank you very much. Good job. All right, so anybody have any discussion points on this? Nope. Anybody have any motions? Don't need them. Can't make them. This. I've been here so long I forgot. Okay, well, that's right. So this too is continued until the next meeting on June 20th. Hopefully we'll have a quorum then, and we can dispose of it properly. So we don't have any old business, no public hearings, no new business, no audience participation. Do we have a staff report?
There is no staff report.
We don't have a study session. Therefore, we are adjourned.